Several sects operating on the periphery of early Christianity shared a specific inversion of the standard cosmic narrative. They argued that the material universe is not a divine creation, but a flawed mechanical trap designed to imprison spiritual elements within physical matter. These groups blamed physical creation on a lesser deity, most commonly identified in their texts as Yaldabaoth, or the Demiurge. For 1800 years, academia's understanding of this worldview relied on a compromised dataset. The only surviving records were the polemical texts written by early Orthodox church fathers, primarily Irenaeus, a 2nd century cleric whose goal was to identify and eradicate these rival sects. Relying solely on these texts introduces the distortion of survivor bias into the historical record. When the philosophy of a complex intellectual movement is preserved exclusively through the attacks of its enemies, the evidence is shaped by the motives of the victors. This hostile data bias created a structural illusion. It led centuries of historians to view a diverse intellectual marketplace as a single, unified, heretical movement. That illusion held until 1945, when a local farmer digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt struck a sealed earthenware jar. Inside that jar were 12 leather-bound papyrus codices, ancient manuscript texts stitched together in book form rather than rolled into scrolls. This photograph shows the dense Coptic script of the Apocryphon of John, one of the 52 treatises recovered from the site. These texts were the primary source code, the direct, unedited writings of the sects themselves. Direct access to these primary texts displaced the 1800-year-old Orthodox narrative. The documents revealed a highly diverse landscape of thinkers, integrating early Christian theology, Jewish mysticism, and Middle Platonism. To understand the logic of these systems, we will first reverse engineer the complex cosmological architecture these texts shared. Then, we will examine the modern academic movement, arguing that the category of Gnosticism is a taxonomic ghost that obscures historical reality. By accessing the primary source code, we can move past the analysis of defeated mythologies and begin analyzing these works as rigorous ontological models of the universe. This conceptual framework maps an ontology of enlightenment, prioritizing the acquisition of knowledge over moral reform. The system begins with the monad, the hidden, supreme consciousness, and the ultimate, uncorrupted source code of reality. The monad emanates downward through gradations of divine beings called Aeons, which frequently manifest in male-female pairs known as syzygies, processing divine light further down the chain. The totality of these emanations constitutes the Pleroma, the absolute fullness of God's power. This upper architecture represents a perfect system of spiritual data, existing entirely separate from the physical universe that humans experience. The system encounters a fatal error at the lowest Aeon in the hierarchy, an entity known as Sophia, or wisdom. Sophia attempts to emanate without the consent of her consort, generating a rupture in the divine operating system. The byproduct of this system failure is the Demiurge, a blind creator god severed from the divine light above. Because the Demiurge is concealed outside the Pleroma, he possesses no data regarding the higher Aeons or the monad.
Thinking he is alone in the void, he assumes he is the supreme god. Operating in ignorance, the Demiurge constructs the physical universe, the Kenoma, and generates a host of co-actors called archons to administer this material realm. To power this creation, the Demiurge constructs humankind as a containment vessel. The physical body is designed specifically to imprison stolen fragments of divine light within the material grid. In this specific ontology, human suffering stems from the entrapment of stolen divine data inside a deliberately flawed material prison. If the material body is a trap designed by a hostile creator, salvation cannot be achieved through physical rituals or moral obedience to the creator of that prison. Escape requires a specific data acquisition called Gnosis, experiential knowledge that allows an individual to recognize their own trapped divine nature. To deliver this knowledge, the Godhead dispatches a savior Aeon, often conceptualized as a spiritual, non-physical Christ, who descends from the Pleroma to upload this Gnosis to humanity. Humans possessing this Gnosis are categorized as pneumatic, fully spiritual beings. Upon physical death, this knowledge allows them to bypass the archons and return to the divine source. Salvation in the biblical demiurgic tradition operates as a targeted epistemological rescue mission to retrieve stolen data from a hostile operating system. While this baseline model is logically consistent, applying it uniformly across these ancient sects exposes a flaw. Valentinianism practiced mitigated dualism, treating the physical realm as a perceptual error. Sethianism, however, utilized radical dualism, maintaining impenetrable barriers between light and dark. Then there is Maundeism, an ancient ethno-religious group that completely predates Christianity and reveres John the Baptist as their final teacher rather than Jesus. Unlike the sects relying purely on intellectual revelation, Mandaean practice centers on repeated physical rituals, utilizing river baptisms for the redemption of the soul. Mandaeism, Sethianism, and Valentinianism possess core structural differences so severe that classifying them as branches of a single Gnostic religion is academically dishonest. Academia struggled with this classification for decades, culminating in the 1966 Messina Conference, which attempted to impose a rigid definition of Gnosticism over these disparate groups. Modern scholars, led by researchers like Michael Williams and Karen King, argue that this categorical definition must be abandoned. They argue Gnosticism was an artificial umbrella created by early Orthodox Christians to quarantine diverse theologies. Williams proposes a framework removing the label, viewing these groups as distinct biblical demiurgic traditions that share mythological tropes but maintain unique identities. Late antiquity functioned as a vibrant, competitive marketplace of ideas, where thinkers synthesized Platonism, mathematics, and biblical texts. Removing the monolithic label allows us to evaluate these sects as intellectual innovators who built advanced ontological frameworks. While Gnosticism as a neat historical category may be an illusion, the systematic models these ancient thinkers built remain entirely real. They are a testament to humanity's drive to solve the problem of existence from inside a flawed universe.